The court case that followed was grueling and public. Edward Sullivan's lawyers tried everything: blame the janitors, question Marcus's motives, paint Chelsea as a confused, emotional teenager. But the evidence was overwhelming. The emails, the security footage, Chelsea's recordings, and, most devastatingly, the testimony of the students Marcus had saved, all combined to form a truth no lawyer could twist away. In court, Marcus was asked if he regretted his actions, if he wished he'd kept quiet, kept his head down, just as he'd been taught. He thought of the cost: his burned arm, his ruined scholarship, the pain in his father's eyes, the months of fear and uncertainty. And then he remembered the heat of the flames, the way Chelsea had gasped his name in the darkness, the feeling of her pulse returning beneath his hands. "I don't regret saving anyone," he said, voice steady, "but I regret how many times I was told to be invisible, how many warnings I gave that were ignored, not because they weren't real, but because I wasn't someone you listened to. I hope no one else ever has to make the choice between doing the right thing and keeping their place." When the verdict came, it was more than a legal victory. The jury found Westbrook Academy and Sullivan Technologies guilty of negligence and discrimination. Damages were awarded, not just money, but a legally binding agreement. Westbrook would pay for Marcus's education anywhere he chose, and would establish a scholarship fund for minority students, overseen by a committee including Marcus and his father. Sullivan Technologies faced criminal charges, and for the first time, the company was forced to acknowledge the human cost of cutting corners and silencing whistleblowers. But the true victory came later. With settlement money, Marcus and Walter established the Avery Initiative, a foundation to support students from underrepresented backgrounds who found themselves invisible in the halls of privilege. The program offered mentorship, legal support, and, most importantly, a promise that someone would always listen. Chelsea, forever changed by what she'd witnessed, became the foundation's first youth ambassador. She used her platform, her privilege, for something greater than herself, speaking at schools, conferences, and even on national television. "Courage isn't just doing what's right when it's easy," she said in an interview. "It's doing it when every part of the system tells you not to." The new headmaster at Westbrook invited Marcus back to speak at graduation, a symbolic gesture of the school's attempt at atonement. As he stepped onto the stage, once a place he'd been told he'd never belong, the applause was thunderous. But Marcus didn't bask in the spotlight. He looked out at the crowd, searching for the quiet faces, the ones who sat in the last row, hands in their laps, waiting to be seen. He spoke not just of pain, but of possibility. "Every time you walk past someone you think doesn't matter," he said, "remember, you might not know whose life you're passing by, and you might not know when you'll need someone brave enough to act, even when the world refuses to see them." After the ceremony, Chelsea found him beneath the old oak tree outside the school's main entrance. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of everything that had happened hanging between them. Finally, she smiled, a real, uncertain smile, different from the polished confidence of the girl she'd once been. "Thank you," she said simply. Marcus grinned, something warm and hopeful blooming in his chest. "Thank you for seeing me," he replied. "Really seeing me." As the sun dipped low behind the red brick buildings of Westbrook Academy, Marcus realized he was no longer afraid of being visible. His story, once a whisper in the shadows, had become a call to action, a reminder that sometimes the people least expected to change the world are the ones who do. The world will never be perfect. There will always be cracks in the ceiling, alarms that go ignored, doors that only open for a chosen few. But Marcus's journey proved that one voice, persistent and brave, could make even the most unyielding walls tremble. And as he walked home with his father, the city stretching out ahead, Marcus felt, for the first time in his life, not just seen, but unstoppable. What would you do if you risked everything to save someone's life, only to become the target of suspicion, not gratitude, simply because of who you are? Before we unravel Marcus's story of courage and prejudice, let me ask, have you ever felt completely unseen, no matter how hard you tried? Share your experience in the comments, and let's see how Marcus, the janitor's son, stepped out from the shadows into a spotlight he never asked for. Blood was already dripping from Marcus Avery's hand when the alarm's relentless shriek cut through the smoke. He could barely see. His vision was watery, blurred with exhaustion and acrid stinging. The blonde girl in his arms, unconscious, coughed weakly as he stumbled toward what looked like the light. The air burned. The heat was a living thing, breathing down his neck, clawing at his lungs with every desperate breath. All he could do was clutch Chelsea Sullivan, Billionaire's daughter, the sun around which Westbrook Academy orbited, and hope he could make it one more step. Outside the flaming doors, 3 armed security guards came running. Marcus barely had time to register their presence before he heard the cold, mechanical snap of guns being drawn. For a moment, everything slowed. The agony in his lungs, the weight of the billionaire's daughter across his shoulders, the distant echo of people screaming for help. But the guards weren't running to save them. They were shouting at him, at Marcus, the black janitor's son, to put her down and get on the ground. He didn't drop Chelsea. He just looked at her face, eyes closed, soot streaked across perfect white skin, and wondered not for the first time what the world would do with someone like him in a moment like this. But to understand how Marcus, who had spent most of his life doing everything possible to stay invisible, ended up in this impossible position, we need to rewind. A few months before the fire, Marcus Avery sat in the last row of advanced calculus at Westbrook Academy, elbows tucked tight to his body, head down, fingers quietly tapping the dark, polished wood of his desk. He always tried to appear smaller than he was. At 13, Marcus had already learned the survival strategies of the only black scholarship student in a school built on generations of wealth. He stared at the chalkboard where Mr. Winslow, a man with silver hair and a voice as crisp as his cufflinks, had scrawled a monstrous equation. "Who wants to take a shot at this one?" Winslow asked, scanning the room. His gaze slid right past Marcus as if he wasn't there. It always did. Marcus's hand twitched but didn't rise. He'd learned his lesson months ago. Every time he dared raise his hand, every time he answered too quickly, someone would laugh or sigh or call him a show-off, and the teacher would frown, sometimes even ask, "Are you sure you don't want to join the basketball team, Marcus?" As if the only thing they expected from a black kid was athleticism. He knew the answer. He always did. He learned it the hard way. At Westbrook, the teachers prided themselves on discipline and tradition. They claimed to value diversity, but Marcus knew he and the other 4 black students, out of 500, were kept around mainly for photo ops. Every year, the admissions office would photograph him and his peers, uniforms pressed, smiles forced, brochures boasting a school for all. But the rest of the year, their presence was tolerated, not welcomed. Marcus's story didn't begin at Westbrook. It began in a small, neat house on Glenwood Street, before cancer hollowed out his mother and medical bills hollowed out everything else. His mother, Julia, had been a math teacher at the local middle school. Sharp, loving, always encouraging. When she died, Marcus's father, Walter, fell silent. The bills kept coming, so Walter took the head janitor job at Westbrook Academy, the only place offering health benefits and, most importantly, a scholarship for staff kids. They left their old house, crammed into a 1-bedroom apartment above a noisy deli. Walter slept on the couch so Marcus could have the bedroom. "You need a desk, son. A real one. That's how you get out of this." But at Westbrook, getting out never felt further away. During lunch, Marcus sat alone, his second-hand uniform a shade too dull, shoes a little scuffed, backpack patched at the corners. When teachers assigned group projects, everyone else paired up quickly, leaving him to work alone or begrudgingly included after a teacher's awkward intervention. Still, Marcus excelled at what he could control: his grades. Math and science were his sanctuary. He memorized textbooks, solved bonus problems, stayed up late with old textbooks from the library. He won a statewide math competition, but the school never posted about it. Instead, they spotlighted a trustee's son who finished third. If Marcus was a ghost in the halls, Chelsea Sullivan was the center of gravity. She walked through the marble corridors, surrounded by laughter, always with a designer bag slung over her shoulder and hair that looked like it had never known a bad day. Chelsea was the daughter of Edward Sullivan, the school's main donor, CEO of Sullivan Technologies, and the man whose name was engraved above the science wing. The staff treated her like royalty. Marcus had never spoken to Chelsea, though they shared 6 classes in 2 years. Why would she notice him? The worlds they inhabited were parallel lines, never meant to cross. But one day those lines blurred. Marcus found the rooftop greenhouse by accident. He was helping his dad replace filters in the 3rd-floor vents when a loose ceiling tile revealed a narrow staircase leading upward. The greenhouse was dusty, forgotten, half filled with broken tables and pots. But it had a perfect view of the city and, best of all, no people. It became his safe place. Here he ate lunch, read library books, and sometimes just watched the clouds change shape. He could breathe, if only for a moment. One afternoon, while sketching math problems on a scrap of paper, Marcus noticed a jagged crack snaking through one of the old metal beams supporting the glass roof. He snapped a few photos with his phone, then showed them to his dad that evening. Walter frowned, concern and weariness etched deep into his face. "That looks bad, son. I'll file a report tomorrow, but you know how it is. Just keep your head down. Your education is your ticket. Don't give them a reason to take it away." Marcus nodded, but a knot of worry sat in his stomach. Founders' Day at Westbrook was a spectacle. Luxury cars lined the circular drive. Families in tailored suits and dresses strolled across the green. Camera crews from local news stations set up by the main entrance. For the students, it was both pageant and performance. The day the school showed itself off to the world. Assignments for the event mirrored the social hierarchy. The student council president gave the welcoming address. The sons and daughters of alumni led campus tours. Marcus was assigned to facilities setup, moving folding chairs, unspooling cables, stacking tables, tasks shared with the maintenance crew, including his own father. He didn't complain. In fact, he preferred it. Here with his dad, he could work quietly, away from the forced smiles and whispered jokes of the main crowd. Inside, Chelsea was struggling. The science fair was the crown jewel of Founders Day, and her father expected nothing less than first prize. Her project on building structural integrity, a theme she'd only half understood, was supposed to wow a panel of alumni and technology journalists. That afternoon, while Marcus was coiling cables in an empty classroom, he started muttering through the math behind structural failures. Unbeknownst to him, Chelsea stood just outside the door listening. For weeks, she'd been stuck on the very concept Marcus now explained, out loud to himself. She hesitated, then stepped in. "Sorry, did you say the load calculation changes if the acceleration's not constant?" Marcus looked up, surprised. He'd never heard Chelsea speak directly to him. He nodded warily. "Yeah, if the base moves, the variables change. You need a different equation." Chelsea flushed. "Can you show me?" He considered. For a second, he imagined what would happen if the other students saw them together. But the chance to actually be valued for his mind, just once, was too much to resist. They spent the next 20 minutes working through the problem. Chelsea asked sharp questions, and to her credit, listened to every answer. As she left, she paused. "Would you help me with the rest? I could meet you anywhere. Tonight?" He hesitated, weighing the risks. "Science Lab, 7. You have the name. Security won't stop you. Me, they might." That evening, as Marcus and Chelsea worked, the conversation shifted from math to more personal topics. She marveled at how easily he corrected mistakes, how he seemed to see the solution instantly. When she asked why he never spoke up in class, Marcus looked away. "Last time I did, Peterson told me to know my place. That happens here, a lot, in small ways every day." Chelsea tried to defend the school. "But we have diversity scholarships." He cut her off gently. "Do you know my name?" She hesitated, cheeks turning pink. "Marcus, right?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We've had 6 classes together. Some teachers still call me Martin or Malik. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's a reminder, every day, that I don't matter enough to remember." They worked in silence after that. The next day, Edward Sullivan arrived at the school by helicopter. His entrance was theatrical, calculated, a billionaire's way of reminding everyone who owned the place. Administrators fawned, students stared, and teachers nervously checked their ties. Walter Avery was fixing a banner outside the auditorium when Sullivan passed. Walter nodded, but Sullivan didn't return the gesture. Instead, he turned to Principal Dempsey and murmured, "Keep the maintenance crew out of sight today." Walter pretended not to hear. Decades of masking pain with professionalism had become second nature. That afternoon, as Marcus and Chelsea continued their secret collaboration, a burning electrical smell drifted through the lab. Marcus wrinkled his nose. He traced the scent to a vent and saw a thin wisp of smoke. He flagged down Ms. Curtis, the event coordinator. "Ma'am, I think there's something burning in the wall." She barely glanced at him. "The HVAC system does that sometimes. Just focus on your job, Jackson." Marcus tried again with the security guard in the hallway. "Are you trying to sabotage the event?" The guard snapped. "Stay in your assigned area, or you'll be asked to leave." No one listened. His warnings were met with indifference, or worse, suspicion. That night, unable to sleep, Marcus stared at the ceiling of his small bedroom. He replayed the dismissals, the looks, the endless reminders that he didn't belong. But he also remembered Chelsea's earnest questions, her willingness to listen, even if only for her own benefit. Maybe, just maybe, he could matter. If not for the school, then for someone. As the city lights flickered outside his window, Marcus made a decision. If he saw smoke tomorrow, if he saw danger, he would act, no matter what anyone else thought. Because even if the world kept him invisible, he refused to be useless. Tomorrow, Founders Day would dawn bright and loud, banners flying and the school sparkling with wealth. But beneath the surface, cracks were spreading. And soon, the world that had never seen Marcus Avery would have no choice but to watch him step into the fire. If you had a chance to warn people about disaster, would you keep speaking up even when no one wanted to listen? Or would you finally silence yourself to survive? Let's see what Marcus Avery did, as Westbrook Academy's most important day dawned, bringing with it a storm no one saw coming, except the boy no one wanted to hear. The morning sun turned Westbrook Academy into something out of a glossy magazine. The lawns were flawless, banners fluttered with the school's blue and gold crest, and the air buzzed with the promise of performance and approval. Marcus arrived before dawn, dressed in his crispest uniform shirt, hands slightly trembling as he helped his father unload folding chairs from the battered school van. Walter Avery's eyes were tired but soft as he ruffled his son's hair, pride shining through despite the fatigue. "Remember, just get through today. You got this, Marcus." As they moved through the empty halls, Marcus noticed every detail. The waxed floors reflecting chandelier light, the smell of fresh paint, the way even silence felt rich here. Walter whistled softly as he worked, but Marcus's mind was on the strange burning odor he'd noticed the night before. Was it still there, beneath the layers of polish and perfume? Or was it only his nerves, wound tight by years of being invisible? By 8, the campus was swarming. Luxury cars disgorged alumni, donors, and local politicians, all eager to shake hands, see and be seen. The school's brass band struck up a cheerful tune by the front steps. Marcus kept his eyes down and his movements quick, blending into the background as best he could. The staff had been warned, especially the janitorial team, to remain discreet, which everyone understood meant be invisible. The administration was determined. Nothing would mar Founders Day, not even a stray leaf on the walkway. As Marcus stacked chairs in the main hall, he caught snatches of laughter and conversation. He heard his own name, or what passed for it, in the voices of teachers greeting each other. "That scholarship kid, Marlon, or whatever. Quiet but smart. At least he's not causing trouble." He swallowed hard, the old ache of invisibility pulsing through him. From the balcony, Chelsea Sullivan surveyed the crowd, a tight smile fixed to her face as she clutched a portfolio containing her science project notes. She was surrounded by friends, girls with perfect hair and expensive shoes. Yet for the first time, she felt oddly out of place. Her thoughts kept drifting to Marcus, the way he'd explained her project's equations so simply, without judgment, as if her confusion were the most natural thing in the world. Below, Edward Sullivan arrived, trailed by a coterie of administrators, journalists, and security. His tailored suit gleamed in the morning light. The principal, Dr. Dempsey, beamed with rehearsed warmth, and the school photographer snapped picture after picture of the billionaire shaking hands, his arm draped around Chelsea's shoulders for the cameras. In the service hallway, Walter Avery wiped sweat from his brow and nudged Marcus gently. "Remember what I said. If you see trouble, keep your head down. Some places only see us when there's blame to pass." Marcus nodded, but a stubborn spark inside him wouldn't quite die. He still smelled something off, a faint tang of burning, sharp, and chemical coming from the science wing. He hesitated, then slipped away, following the scent. As he rounded the corner, Marcus spotted Ms. Curtis, the event coordinator, balancing a clipboard and barking orders. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said quietly. "I think something's wrong with the air system in the science building. There's a burning smell. Maybe something's overheating." She glanced at him with a flicker of annoyance, barely pausing in her schedule. "The HVAC always acts up in spring. Don't worry about it, Jackson. Go help with chairs. We have donors arriving in 10. Marcus wanted to protest, but Ms. Curtis was already moving away, talking into her headset. He wandered to the side entrance of the science building, nose wrinkling at the now stronger smell. He glanced at his phone. Should he call his dad? Go to security? Would anyone believe him if he insisted? His heart hammered in his chest. The last thing he needed was to draw attention. Not today. Not ever. Inside the science wing, Chelsea stood in the crowded exhibition hall, rehearsing her speech under her breath, while a small group of teachers and students set up their booths. Her stomach fluttered with nerves. Her father's expectations pressed down on her like a physical weight. A few doors down, Marcus peeked into a maintenance closet, checking the electrical panels. The heat was unmistakable now. A patch of wall warm to the touch, a coil of smoke curling out from a vent overhead. He pushed aside panic and hurried to find Mr. Pollard, one of the school's security guards. "Mr. Pollard, I really think something's burning in the wall behind the science lab. There's smoke." Pollard, a heavy-set man with a permanent scowl, frowned. "Trying to get out of work, huh? Or looking for trouble? Didn't I see you wandering the halls last week after hours? Stay out of restricted areas, Marcus. Let the grown-ups handle it." Marcus felt his cheeks burn. "But sir, there's no buts. Go do your job. I'll take a look when I can." He watched as Pollard walked off in the opposite direction, not even glancing at the science building. With a deep breath, Marcus tried to steady himself. He looked up at the banners, the polished glass, the swirl of laughter and applause as Chelsea's father took the stage to welcome the crowd. Principal Dempsey's voice echoed over the speakers, grand and formal. "Today we celebrate not only our founders, but the future of Westbrook Academy. Thanks in no small part to the generosity of the Sullivan family. We are privileged to have Mr. Edward Sullivan and his talented daughter Chelsea here with us today." The audience erupted into polite applause. In the shadows, Marcus wondered if any of this was real, or if it was just a show, like a set built out of cardboard and old lies, one spark away from burning down. He slipped back toward the science wing, hugging the walls, watching the adults usher guests past with forced smiles. Chelsea, meanwhile, was led into a smaller lab for last-minute prep by Mrs. Langston, her favorite teacher. Mrs. Langston squeezed her hand, whispering, "You'll do fine, Chelsea. Just breathe." But the weight of expectation never lifted. Outside, Walter Avery caught sight of his son darting back and forth near the science building and waved him over. "Marcus, you all right?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "Just making sure everything's okay." He couldn't bring himself to worry his father more. Just then, a sharp shout cut through the air. Someone had dropped a tray of champagne flutes, shattering glass and startling a nearby guest. Laughter rippled through the crowd, covering up the tense moment. Inside, Marcus could hear the sound of the old ventilation fans rattling. The smell was getting worse, more pungent, almost metallic. With his heart in his throat, Marcus ducked into the stairwell, taking the back way up to the second floor where he knew the wiring ran behind the walls. He pressed his ear to the wall. Was that the crackle of fire, or just his imagination? He reached for the nearest fire alarm, only to find it taped over with a bright sign. "System temporarily disabled during event. Do not touch." He stared at the warning, confusion and anger boiling up. Who disables a fire alarm on a day when the school is packed with people? Suddenly, a pair of footsteps echoed on the stairs. Marcus quickly moved aside as Principal Dempsey swept past, chatting with a local politician. Neither man noticed him. Marcus knew he was running out of time. If no one would listen, he'd have to act on his own. Back downstairs, Chelsea stepped up to the stage, her project displayed on a monitor behind her. Structural integrity in historic buildings. Her friends whispered encouragement as her father nodded approvingly from the front row. In the back, Marcus lingered, eyes fixed on the ventilation grates above. A thin wisp of gray smoke was now curling out, nearly invisible in the bright lights. He watched as a teacher dismissed it as just steam. Marcus's heart raced. No, this was different. This was danger. His mind worked furiously. He thought of the rooftop greenhouse, the cracks in the beams, the strange noises he'd heard, the way his warnings had been ignored every step of the way. He remembered his father's advice, keep your head down, and his mother's words from years ago. If you know something is wrong, don't look away, Marcus. Speak up, even if your voice shakes. Taking one last steadying breath, Marcus ran down the side hallway to the main event office, bursting in just as Ms. Curtis was finalizing the guest list. Ma'am, I know you told me to leave it alone, but there's smoke, real smoke, coming from the science wing. I checked the walls and the fire alarm is disabled. She spun on him, face tight with frustration. This is not the time, Marcus. You're out of your area, and you're making us look bad. Please go back outside and help your father. Marcus stared at her, incredulous. But the words died in his throat. He realized nothing he said would matter. Not today. The next minutes blurred. He returned to the science building, ducked into a service corridor only he and his father used, and pushed open the heavy steel door behind the stage. Smoke was thick now. He could see a faint orange glow through a hairline crack in the paneling. The electrical fire was spreading. Panic seized him, but survival instincts and years of watching his father work kicked in. He grabbed a heavy flashlight and forced open a utility hatch, coughing as the heat smacked him in the face. Down the hall, Chelsea was delivering the opening lines of her speech. Suddenly, the lights flickered. She hesitated. Some in the crowd chuckled, thinking it was a technical hiccup. In the side corridor, Marcus realized the worst was happening. If the fire hit the main fuse box, the entire wing would go up in minutes. He had to warn them, now. He ran toward the stage door just as the alarm, long dormant, began to wail, a shrill, insistent scream. Panic hit the crowd instantly. Teachers shouted, students scattered. Somewhere, Marcus heard Chelsea's voice, rising in confusion, then fear. The smoke was pouring in now, thick and choking. Marcus thought only of the service routes he'd memorized, the hidden maintenance paths, the shortcuts his father had shown him. He ducked into the nearest corridor, coughing, eyes burning. He could hear shouts. Where's Chelsea? Where's my daughter? Edward Sullivan's voice, raw with terror. A door slammed. Marcus followed the noise, heart pounding. He found the side lab where Chelsea and a group of other students were trapped, smoke curling under the door. He didn't hesitate. He battered the door with his shoulder until the lock snapped. The air was thick, toxic, barely breathable. Chelsea staggered toward him, her face streaked with tears and soot. Marcus, he grabbed her hand. Come on, follow me. There's another way out. The others, students who'd never said a kind word to Marcus in their lives, looked at him in terror, doubt flickering in their eyes. But Marcus's certainty, the strength in his voice, cut through the panic. If you want to live, you have to trust me. Now! With smoke swirling and the sounds of chaos growing, Marcus led them into the darkness, toward the maintenance corridors, toward a fight for survival none of them were ready for. In the smoky corridor, Marcus led the group of terrified students through the hidden maintenance route, every sense on edge. The world behind them was unraveling. Alarms still screamed, smoke poured beneath doors, the sound of panic echoing through the marble halls of privilege. But in the thick of danger, Marcus's mind worked with a calm, calculated focus. He had no choice. There was no one else to rely on, and no one left to see him as invisible now. Chelsea clung to his hand, her usual poise gone, replaced by raw fear. The others, Jason Cooper, Amanda Pierce, Taylor Watson, and Brock Montgomery, moved in a huddle, trusting Marcus not because they suddenly believed in him, but because he was the only one who seemed to know what to do. For years, these same classmates had ignored him, whispered jokes in the cafeteria, treated him like background noise. Now, with smoke curling around their ankles and the air growing hotter by the second, every eye turned to him in desperate hope. Marcus guided them through the narrow maintenance passage, the way half lit by his phone's flashlight. The space was cramped, littered with buckets and old cleaning supplies, smelling of bleach and metal, and now, ominously, smoke. Somewhere above, the beams groaned as fire chewed at the bones of the building. Marcus's mind flashed to the rooftop greenhouse. Those cracks in the beams. Had anyone ever bothered to fix them? "We have to keep moving," he said, voice low but commanding. "Stay low, cover your mouths, breathe through your sleeves if you can." Taylor, her face streaked with tears, started to hyperventilate. "We're going to die in here. There's no way out. We're trapped." Chelsea turned, her own voice trembling but fierce. "He knows these hallways. Just do what Marcus says." Marcus shot Chelsea a quick, grateful look, then pressed forward. As they rounded a corner, a fresh wave of heat hit them. Ahead, a section of ceiling had collapsed, blocking the passage with splintered wood and shattered plaster. Smoke billowed, swirling in a vortex. There was no going back. The way behind them was a wall of flame. Brock, sweat pouring from his forehead, glared at Marcus with suspicion. "Why should we follow you? How do we know you didn't set this up? You're always skulking around." The accusation stung, more from reflex than surprise. Even at the edge of disaster, suspicion found him. But Marcus didn't have time to argue. He crouched, peering at the mess. "If I'd wanted to hurt anyone, I wouldn't be leading you out. If you want to survive, help me move this. Now!" Jason and Amanda snapped out of their paralysis, grabbing boards and helping Marcus clear the blockage. Chelsea joined, her hands shaking but determined. Only Brock and Taylor held back, but peer pressure won. They worked together, scraping and dragging debris aside until they had opened a narrow gap, just enough for them to crawl through, one by one. As Marcus crawled through last, a burst of sparks fell from the ceiling, landing on his sleeve and burning through to his skin. He gasped in pain but bit it back, focusing on the path ahead. They emerged into a wider corridor, the old service hallway that ran along the outer wall of the science wing. But the way wasn't safe. At the end of the corridor, fire raged, licking at the walls, blocking the main exit. They had only one chance: the metal fire escape leading from the utility room on the second floor, which Marcus had only seen once, years ago, when his father brought him through during a late-night shift. The group moved, huddled and stumbling. Chelsea was coughing, her breath raspy. Marcus took the lead, arms smarting from the burn, every muscle in his body tense. He pushed open the utility room door, the handle searing hot, nearly scalding his palm, and a wall of smoke rolled in. He shielded his face, urging the others to stay close. Suddenly, a distant explosion shook the building, sending a tremor through the floors. The girls screamed, and Marcus's heart leaped into his throat. Plaster rained from above. Somewhere, far away, the sound of sirens grew louder, echoing through the burning campus. The utility room was filling with smoke. Marcus could barely see, but he remembered the map of the building, memorized from years of helping his dad. The fire escape, rusted and rarely used, was behind a heavy steel door at the far end. He barreled forward, Chelsea stumbling behind him, the others trailing. Brock tripped and went sprawling. Amanda and Jason hauled him to his feet. Chelsea faltered, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She collapsed, sliding to the floor, eyes rolling back. Marcus dropped beside her, panic flickering across his face. "Chelsea, stay with me!" He lifted her, coughing hard, her weight suddenly immense. Blood from his earlier injury stained her uniform, red on white, a stark, ugly contrast. The group reached the steel door. Marcus threw his shoulder against it, but it barely budged. Brock and Jason pushed beside him. Together they forced it open with a shriek of rusted hinges. Cold air, blessedly clean, washed over them as they spilled out onto the iron steps of the fire escape. Below, the scene was chaos. Fire engines crowded the quad, hoses spraying, paramedics waving stretchers. A sea of terrified faces craned upward, searching for survivors. And in the crowd, Walter Avery pushed and shoved, eyes wild, shouting for his son, his voice swallowed by sirens and shouts. Marcus staggered down the steps, Chelsea limp in his arms. The metal vibrated beneath their feet, and every step felt like a lifetime. Taylor collapsed halfway, sobbing. Brock dragged her down, Jason steadying Amanda, whose lips were blue. At the bottom, security guards rushed forward, guns drawn. "Drop her! Get down!" someone yelled. In the space of a second, Marcus went from rescuer to suspect. Every lesson in invisibility replaced by the cold reality of how he looked, what uniform he wore, whose blood stained his shirt. He set Chelsea down as gently as he could, hands raised. Paramedics snatched her up, rushing her to a waiting ambulance. Marcus sank to his knees, body shaking with shock, pain, and something worse, an old, familiar humiliation. In the chaos, Edward Sullivan shoved past the barricade, face twisted in horror and rage. He barely glanced at Marcus, instead falling to his knees beside Chelsea, clutching her hand as paramedics worked. News cameras zoomed in, focusing on the billionaire's daughter, blurring out the black boy in the background. Walter found Marcus a moment later, tears streaming down his face, and pulled his son into a crushing hug. "You did it. You're here. You're safe." But even as his father whispered relief, Marcus saw the way security eyed him. Calculating, suspicious, already rewriting the story. Later at the hospital, as doctors treated his burns and smoke inhalation, Marcus was kept in a separate room, a guard posted outside. A nurse, clipboard clutched to her chest, frowned as she entered. "This area is usually reserved for special patients," she said, not unkindly but clearly. Marcus nodded, too tired to argue, too broken to care. Across the hall, Chelsea awoke to a world of flashing cameras and worried faces. Her father, still in his suit, hovered close, refusing to let her out of his sight. "You're safe, sweetheart." "Everything's okay," he lied, never mentioning the boy who'd saved her life. At Westbrook, the cleanup began. Investigators combed the burnt science wing, asking quiet questions. Why was Marcus in the building? Why did he know about hidden passages? Who had disabled the fire alarms? In the teacher's lounge, whispers spread. "You know that kid, Marcus? He was acting strange all week." Chelsea asked about Marcus. Her father's face darkened. "Don't worry about him. He's being taken care of." When she insisted on seeing him, a security guard appeared outside her door. In his hospital bed, Marcus watched the news, saw the narrative take shape. "Heroic staff rescues students," the anchor announced. No names, no faces. The story belonged to the school, to the donors, to everyone but him. When the principal finally visited, his voice was formal, polite. "We appreciate your bravery, Marcus, but there are questions about your behavior, accessing restricted areas, alarming staff." Marcus looked away, 1,000 retorts caught in his throat. Why defend himself? He'd saved lives. He'd done everything right. Still, it wasn't enough. He was still the janitor's son, still invisible, unless someone needed a scapegoat. That night, as Walter held his son's hand and the world outside spun its stories, Marcus whispered into the dark, "I did what I had to do. Why do I feel like I did something wrong?" His father squeezed his hand, silent and proud and afraid all at once. Outside the hospital window, the lights of Westbrook Academy flickered, reflecting off the glass. The school would rebuild. The donors would return. The banners would fly again. But for Marcus Avery, everything had changed. He was visible now, but not as a hero, as a problem to be managed, a story to be spun. And deep inside, beneath the pain and confusion, a different fire burned. The slow, growing realization that sometimes survival wasn't enough. Sometimes the bravest thing was refusing to disappear. Morning at St. Elizabeth's Hospital broke with the colorless light of exhaustion. Marcus Avery lay awake, his burns stinging beneath a web of gauze, his throat raw from smoke and unshed words. For hours, machines beeped softly in the background, the white ceiling above as blank as the faces of the people who came and went. Nurses with clipped voices, doctors who barely glanced at his chart before moving on. Only Walter's presence by the bedside grounded him, his father's hand warm and steady, his eyes shadowed by worry and pride. Beyond the door, The world moved on as if nothing had changed. The headlines told a story Marcus barely recognized. Fire at Westbrook Academy, heroic rescue for billionaire's daughter. The details were vague, the focus always on Chelsea Sullivan, her father's grief, the school's gratitude for brave staff actions. No mention of Marcus. No mention of the janitor's son, whose hands were still stained with blood, whose warnings had been ignored until it was almost too late. Chelsea awoke on the other side of the building, sunlight streaming through the window as a parade of doctors and administrators filtered through her room. Her father sat at her side, the lines on his face deeper than before, but his authority undimmed. When she asked about Marcus, Edward Sullivan's jaw clenched. "That boy will be fine. He's being dealt with." There was a finality in his tone, a closing of the subject that made Chelsea's stomach twist. She tried again, more insistent this time, but her father waved the question away, replacing concern with caution. "You need rest. This isn't the time for distractions." Across the city, news vans circled Marcus's apartment building. Cameras pointed at their windows. Reporters loitered in the parking lot, shoving microphones in the faces of neighbors. Rumors swirled. Who was Marcus? How did he know about the fire? Was the school in danger? Each question felt like a new blow, as if the world was waiting for him to trip and prove every ugly stereotype. At the hospital, Walter opened an envelope from Westbrook's administration. The language was cold, bureaucratic. Marcus was to refrain from attending classes until the investigation into the fire concluded. There was mention of scholarship review, a threat so thinly veiled it made Walter's hands shake as he read it aloud. "They're trying to push you out, son. After everything you did for them." Marcus could barely meet his father's eyes. "They think I set the fire," he whispered. "Or they want to." Walter's grip tightened. "That's not who you are. That's never who you were. But some people, some systems, don't need proof to make someone like you the villain." In the silence that followed, Marcus remembered every sideways glance, every mispronounced name, every time he'd been made to feel grateful just for being allowed in the room. The students he'd saved, Jason, Amanda, Taylor, and Brock, were silent. None reached out, none spoke up. When Marcus texted them, only Jason replied, a single line. "My parents don't want me involved." "Sorry." The words felt colder than the hospital room itself. Even Chelsea's attempts to contact him were blocked. Her father's security team monitored her phone, deleting anything addressed to the Averys before she could see their replies. Chelsea grew restless, her frustration building into anger. For the first time, she noticed the gaps in her father's explanations, the way administrators steered conversations away from details, the increasing security around her hospital room. She started recording conversations, secretly, using the voice memo app on her phone. Late one night, she overheard her father on a hushed call with his head of security. "I don't care how you do it, Tom. Make this go away. That boy and his father know too much. If anyone starts digging, we're finished." The words landed like a stone in her chest. For years, Chelsea had lived in the glow of her father's power, believing that money could fix anything, that their family's excellence was earned. Now she saw how easily the truth could be twisted, how the very system that protected her could crush someone else without a second thought. At the same time, anonymous messages began to slip under the Averys' apartment door. Some were threats. "Know your place. Leave Westbrook before you regret it." Others were warnings, more chilling in their ambiguity. Walter started sleeping with a baseball bat beside the couch. At night, Marcus lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind spinning with questions he couldn't voice. The police finally came to take Marcus's statement. The detective, Brooks, asked about Marcus's history. Was he often in trouble? Did he have friends at school? Was he jealous of the other students? Walter bristled, producing his son's perfect attendance records, his certificates, his math competition trophies. The officer took notes, but Marcus could tell by his expression that the story had already been decided somewhere far above their heads. The fire marshal's preliminary findings suggested faulty wiring as the cause, but the report vanished as soon as Sullivan Technologies' lawyers arrived. Instead, whispers circulated that Marcus had been seen near the electrical panels earlier in the day, a detail stripped of context, presented as evidence. Days blurred together. The hospital discharged Marcus with instructions to rest, but rest was impossible. At home, the phones rang with reporters' questions and anonymous threats. Online, strangers argued about him, some calling him a hero, others questioning his motives. The same pictures appeared again and again. A blurred face in a borrowed uniform, standing beside a burning building, always in the background of someone else's story. A letter arrived from the school board, citing behavioral concerns and Marcus's unauthorized presence during the emergency. There was no mention of the lives he'd saved, no acknowledgement of his warnings. Only a thinly veiled threat. If the investigation found wrongdoing, his scholarship would be revoked. Walter read the letter with growing anger. They want you gone. It's easier for them if you disappear. That night, father and son sat at the small kitchen table, college brochures scattered between them. Marcus stared at a picture of MIT, the dream he'd nursed since he was 10. Doesn't matter how hard I work, he muttered. Doesn't matter what I do. They'll never let me belong. Walter sat heavily beside him, the weight of years pressing down. You know, when I was your age, I reported my track coach for using slurs against black athletes. I had witnesses, even a recording. School protected him. My scholarship disappeared. My college recommendations vanished. One accusation from a black kid, and everything I'd built was gone. He paused, voice thick with emotion. I always hoped it would be different for you. A knock on the door startled them both. Walter checked the peephole, then opened it to find Chelsea standing in the hallway, a hoodie pulled low over her eyes, a trembling flash drive clutched in her hand. I have proof, she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. Inside, she plugged the drive into the Avery's battered laptop. The screen filled with emails and video clips, security footage of Marcus reporting the smoke to Ms. Curtis, internal memos from Sullivan Technologies detailing cost-cutting on electrical work, warnings about code violations buried in corporate jargon. Marcus stared, a mix of hope and fury boiling up. How did you get this? My dad never changes his passwords, and he doesn't think I'm smart enough to look. Walter let out a low whistle, equal parts amazement and dread. This could change everything, or it could make things even more dangerous for you. Chelsea shook her head. I can't stay quiet, not after what I saw, not after what he's willing to do to protect his company. As they talked, Walter's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then paled. I've been fired, he said softly, for creating a hostile work environment, because I asked questions about the fire. The words hung between them, heavy with the knowledge that the walls were closing in. But outside the apartment, something unexpected was happening. Neighbors, moved by Marcus's story, began leaving notes of support on their door. Parents from Marcus's old school started a small protest outside Westbrook's gates, holding hand-painted signs. Justice for Marcus Avery. Heroes don't have a color. Local news barely covered it, but the gesture lit a small, stubborn hope. The following evening, Chelsea Sullivan, Edward's estranged wife, appeared at the protest, her voice steady as she denounced her husband's pattern of discrimination. What happened to Marcus isn't an isolated case, she declared to the crowd. It's how Edward protects his power, always at the expense of others. In response, Edward Sullivan announced a multi-million-dollar fire safety initiative, positioning himself as the hero, quietly shifting blame for the tragedy onto the maintenance department, onto Walter. The press, hungry for a new angle, painted the family as troubled and potentially litigious. College rejection letters trickled in for Marcus, each one stinging more than the last. Teachers who had once praised him stopped answering his emails. Recommendation letters vanished without explanation. The world that had once seemed full of possibilities now felt smaller and colder than ever. But the fire that had burned through the school had also burned something into Marcus, a refusal to fade quietly. Chelsea became his ally, connecting him with a civil rights attorney, Benjamin Grant, known for taking on powerful institutions. Grant listened to their story, brows furrowed, then smiled grimly. This is bigger than Westbrook. This is about who gets to be seen and who gets erased. Together, they gathered evidence, built a case. At first, the school board and Sullivan's lawyers dismissed them, confident they could outlast any challenge. But when Chelsea's testimony and the corporate emails came to light, Public opinion began to shift. The hashtag number sign JusticeForMarcus trended, sparking conversations about privilege and silence in elite schools. Within weeks, the state attorney general's office announced an investigation into the fire, the cover-up, and Westbrook's treatment of its scholarship students. For the first time in months, Marcus allowed himself to hope. Late at night, as the city slept, Marcus and his father sat at the window watching the streetlights. "You proud of me?" Marcus asked quietly. Walter pulled him close, his answer simple and absolute. "Always, son. Not because you survived, but because you refused to stay silent." And in the dark, with the world finally listening, Marcus realized that even if he'd been made a target, even if he'd lost everything he'd worked for, he'd won something more important: the right to speak, the right to be seen, and the courage to fight for others like him who had spent too long in the shadows. There are moments in life when the world holds its breath, waiting to see whether you will break or rise. For Marcus Avery, this was that moment. The fight had moved beyond the smoky halls of Westbrook Academy, beyond the burned-out science wing, and into places he'd only seen on television. Courtrooms, newsrooms, the marble chambers of government. But the stakes had never been more personal. The day of Marcus's testimony at the state attorney general's office arrived gray and rainy, the city hunched under low clouds. He wore his only suit, a little too small, borrowed from his father. Walter stood beside him, proud but anxious, a reminder that Marcus was not alone, no matter how many times the world had tried to make him feel that way. Chelsea was there too, sitting quietly on the other side of the waiting room, her eyes steady, her jaw set in a defiance that had become her new armor. Inside the conference room, Attorney General Louise Kim, a woman whose presence filled the room even when she spoke barely above a whisper, welcomed Marcus with a nod. "We're not here just to ask what happened the day of the fire," she said, flipping open a folder thick with evidence. "We're here to understand how a school that claims to protect its students could fail so completely when it mattered most. Tell us your story, Marcus." All of it. And he did. He spoke of cracked ceilings and unanswered warnings, of the years spent shrinking himself to fit a space that was never meant for him, of the pain of being both invisible and, suddenly, a suspect. He told them about Chelsea, how she'd listened when no one else had, how she'd risked her comfort and safety to bring the truth into the light. He described the terror in the burning hallways, the feeling of carrying another life in his arms and knowing that saving her might cost him everything. By the time he finished, the room was silent except for the scratch of pens and the soft clatter of a tape recorder being turned off. Attorney General Kim closed her folder, eyes thoughtful. "You've been braver than most adults ever have to be," she said softly. "We will not let this story disappear." Word of the investigation swept through the city like wildfire. Reporters camped outside Sullivan Technologies' gleaming headquarters. Local politicians, once eager to pose for photos at Westbrook, now stumbled over themselves to distance their names from the scandal. The school's board held emergency meetings, their polished confidence crumbling as more evidence surfaced: emails, memos, video clips, the testimony of Chelsea and eventually of the other students Marcus had saved. Not everyone stood up at once. Amanda, Jason, Taylor, and Brock wrestled with their parents' fears and the pressure to stay silent. But when Amanda finally posted a shaky video online, tears on her cheeks, her voice clear as she admitted that Marcus had saved my life, and I was too afraid to say thank you, the tide began to turn. Jason and Taylor followed, then Brock, each statement building a wall of truth too high to ignore. The media's tone changed. The headline no longer read, "Billionaire's daughter rescued in tragic fire." Now it asked, "Who is Marcus Avery? And what does his story reveal about power in our schools?" The hashtag number sign JusticeForMarcus trended for weeks, flooding social media with support from around the world. Black alumni from Westbrook and other elite schools began sharing their own stories. Stories of being overlooked, misnamed, dismissed, until disaster forced someone to pay attention. Sullivan Technologies, under mounting pressure, saw its stock value plummet. Major shareholders demanded Edward Sullivan's resignation. Meanwhile, Chelsea's mother, Catherine, used her position on the board to force open the company's records, revealing a pattern of negligence and discrimination stretching back years. The school, desperate to stem the damage, suspended Principal Dempsey and several administrators. Policies changed overnight, but Marcus and his father understood better than anyone. Real change is never instant.